so sometimes we get the question, well, who is CFT particularly good for, or what sorts of clients would CFT be really good for? Now, I've used CFT with a wide variety of clients, most of which have what would generally be called emotional disturbances. So depression, anger problems, anxiety, those sorts of things. The advantage that I think CFT has, for example, over like kind of straight cognitive behavior therapy, is that it was really developed. Paul Gilbert really developed CFT after observing that when he used these kind of really powerful cognitive behavior therapy protocols to help depressed patients, that there were some folks who actually, although it worked for a lot of people, there were some folks it didn't seem to work for. For some people, for example, could say, well, you know, I was able to identify my thinking errors and I was able to gather evidence to refute them and to generate new thoughts. But those new thoughts were really reassuring. They weren't particularly comforting. They didn't feel any better, even though they were thinking new things. And when Paul looked a little more deeply into these clients, what he found is that there was a common link between these folks who didn't seem to respond to the kind of traditional protocols, and it was shame. These were folks who were sort of down almost in their bones, had this deep sense of knowing that there's something wrong with me, right? That they carried this shame, and this would manifest in the tendency to criticize themselves, to attack themselves, to beat themselves up for the emotions they'd have or the thoughts they'd have. And even when they would try and generate reassuring thoughts, those reassuring thoughts wouldn't show up in a kind way. They would show up in a really kind of harsh, critical mental voice. So you might imagine a reassuring thought, you know, that you might generate in CFT is, rather than thinking, oh, I can't do anything right, right? You might have the thought, you might do some, data collection and see, and actually try and replace it with, well, actually I do quite a number of things pretty well, right? But in the mind of those depressed patients with the shame, it didn't sound like, oh, actually there are a number of things that I do pretty well. It's like, no, of course there are things I can do well. Right? That doesn't feel very good. Even though the thought is different, it doesn't feel very reassuring. Marsha Linehan in dialectical behavior therapy sometimes talks about Teflon mind. And when she talks about that, she means developing a mind that the negative stuff kind of bounces off. I think shame can operate as a sort of Teflon mind too, but in a negative way. I think shame in some ways, this sense that there's something wrong with me, can be almost a mental Teflon that keeps the good stuff from getting in. So even when you get good feedback, even when you learn positive things about yourself, it doesn't sink in. It bounces right off, because underneath everything, you know there's something wrong with you. And the thing I like about compassion-focused therapy is that there are layers to the therapy. There are the different things we do. I call them in the book CFT Made Simple, layered processes and practices. But the idea is that, yes, there are a lot of compassion practices in CFT, but there are other ways that we use the therapeutic relationship, that we help facilitate certain realizations, ways of understanding their experience, kindly, curious, mindful awareness. And all of these things are designed to come together to soften that shame and self-criticism so that people can actually feel reassured and to work with themselves and work with the emotions that scare them and that they previously would have thought, oh, that's something bad about me.